first time I flew on an airplane, I was 4 years old, blabbering to anyone within earshot about my plans once we arrived in Denver. However, I was abruptly interrupted by the flight attendant's in-flight safety spiel. And when she stated that in the event of an emergency, all passengers must put their own masks on before helping others, I was stunned. I immediately scanned my mother's face, expecting to see her eyes rolling. But to my surprise, my mother and caregiver was nodding. Immediately, I thought, do you not love me? What kind of person puts their own mask on before saving the life of their adorable daughter? Turns out, this is actually standard practice on an airplane. But down here on Earth, many are refusing to put a mask on in the first place, even though it has been proven that, just like in an airplane, it should be standard practice because it saves lives. But this behavior is not regulated to a refusal to put on a mask. It's pervasive across American culture, and it's called rampant individualism. As Atlantic essayist Megan O'Rourke wrote last March, flattening the curve of COVID-19 will require a radical shift in Americans' thinking from an individual first to a communitarian ethos. So today, let's come together and discuss the causes of our nation's hyper-individualistic mindset. Next, we'll stand united. Actually, you can keep sitting, but you know what I mean. And examine the causes of our inclination to put ourselves before others, before finally coming up with some solutions that will give us the strength to take on our future together. Now, to say that individualism is inherently bad would be ridiculous. Our world's most significant contributions are tied to a spirit of individualism. The United States has definitely benefited from the work of important solo actors. Thomas Edison, George Washington Carver, and Dr. Shirley Jackson, to name a few. In most cases, the ingenuity of one person leads to the betterment of the collective whole. But it's necessary to point out that the conflict we are discussing today is due to rampant individualism. Individualism unhinged. In other words, my actions can be guided by the belief that my needs come before the needs of the collective group in most, if not all, situations. There is no better place in which we can see the benefits of a collectivist mindset than in comparison to the responses to the COVID-19 outbreak in Hong Kong and New York City. In a report by Robert Melton of Research Square, each city has about 8 million people, are densely populated, heavily reliant on crowded public transportation, and are frequent destinations for travelers from all over the world. Yet, as of January 26, New York City had 26,648 COVID-19 deaths, where Hong Kong had only 171. Hong Kong's response can be described as overwhelmingly collectivist, whereas New York City's is considerably more individualistic. According to Melton's report, 97% of Hong Kong residents reported wearing masks. In contrast, despite a mandate to wear masks in public spaces, roughly 1/3 of men and 1/6 of women were not wearing masks on New York City's often crowded streets. This, while demonstrators across the country have gathered for anti-mask rallies, holding signs that claim "my body, my choice, freedom first, and don't suffocate our rights." In June of 2020, Jingjing Li of UVA and Bo Bayon of the University of British Columbia went county by county to correlate individualism to social distancing compliance. The researchers found that higher local levels of individualism reduced compliance with state lockdown orders by 41%. Also in June of 2020, researchers at the University of Arizona began tracking mask use and social distancing behaviors and found that 64% of Americans who do not wear a mask claim that because they believe it's their right as an American. So now, let's discuss the underlying causes of rampant individualism. American exceptionalism. One of the most influential people on everyday American life was actually someone who is not an American, a man by the name of John Locke. Locke believed that a government's duty was to protect the individual rights of its citizens, which he described as life, liberty, and property. According to Locke, the opportunity to own property was a right that was bestowed by God. Modern philosophy, Judith Thomson argues that if we have stringent rights over our property, we have very much more stringent rights over our own person. So, the extrapolation that not wearing a mask is my right as an American makes sense. The idea that anything is a right because we are American suggests another cause of rampant individualism. John Neame, history professor at Western Washington University, says of American exceptionalism, American citizens have believed that land and opportunity, combined with God's providence, has blessed them. At the center of this myth stood the rugged individual who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and tamed the West. Neame stresses that American exceptionalism also doesn't acknowledge the mistreatment of certain groups in the United States, including Native Americans and Black people. Neame concludes, American exceptionalism has allowed Americans on the left and right to pretend that we could evade the problems facing other societies. However, it's time to accept that we are part of the world, not exceptions to it. On March 13th, 2020, we moved my mom, who's immunocompromised due to her chemotherapy regimen, into a friend's house where she could isolate. Not being able to feel my mother's touch was excruciating, and my entire family ached for her presence. However, we understood that this was necessary so that we did not jeopardize my mother's health. Now, we were able to see my mom on a limited basis, and we've had to make many sacrifices. But my family's situation isn't an isolated one. British poet John Donne once wrote, "No man is an island. Every man is a piece of the continent." In 1623, Donne missed his own daughter's wedding because he was hospitalized with a near-fatal case of spotted fever. Lying in his hospital bed alone, Donne listened to the church bells ringing to mark his daughter's marriage, but also to mark the deaths from those of the spotted fever pandemic. Although it is ironic that we're in a time working toward collectivism, we must currently embrace isolation, just like Donne did. We can combat rampant individualism, but only through a shift in our collective mindset. First, we need to adopt a new public philosophy, one that values individual rights and the good of the community. As Dr. Michael Mascolo states, individual rights are essential for a free society. However, they are insufficient for a free and moral society. We must make the daily, conscious decisions to abandon our personal ideas of freedom in order to move forward as a collective. This begins with having conversations with one another and by making an effort to look past our individually held beliefs. In terms of tangible solutions, we must remind those who are reluctant to wear masks that we are not abandoning our personal freedoms. Rather, we are reorienting the prioritization of our opinions and understanding that freedom has its limits. Additionally, we need to work together so that all businesses are required to give workers sick leave, and that some form of healthcare be provided for all members of our society. Because, unsurprisingly, our country is a better place when everyone in it is healthy and happy. With these demands, we are not trying to squelch individualism. We are merely cautioning against rampant individualism that harms the collective. As Megan O'Rourke of The Atlantic eloquently states, the nation that believes in individuals more than it values community risks its own survival. Second, we need to reject the pull yourself up by the bootstraps narrative that reinforces American exceptionalism and justifies our country's lack of a social safety net and equal access to opportunity. We must acknowledge that the United States has problems, and hoping that they will go away simply because we're Americans is pointless. As author Jhumpa Lahiri puts it, when we come out of this crisis, the real danger will be going back to the way of thinking. Why is this happening to us, as opposed to them? My family and I decided that we were going to the living room couch for Christmas. Though, of course, this was not ideal and not what I wanted to be doing, but I realized it's what I had to do in order to protect myself and others. At the beginning of the pandemic, a popular statement in response to the frustrations people were feeling was one of my favorite High School Musical quotes. We're all in this together. Like me, you're probably frustrated right now, but we can take solace in those words. As we move through the rest of 2020 and obstacles get in our way, it is important for us to remember that yes, we can overcome them together.